Hello, friends. Today I'm talking to Eddie. Eddie, could you please tell us who you are and where you are?
Hey everyone, so my name is Eddie, as you have just said. I am the circuit climbing. So for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been the official photographer for the IFSC. I also run the circuit climbing social medias. When I get around to it, I do the circuit climbing magazine, a few other projects, and currently, due to the wonderful COVID-19, I am back in New Zealand. I have just finished my 2 weeks isolation and come out of that into the middle of a 4 week national isolation. So I'm basically in a month's isolation, sitting in a little quarantine hut in the middle of nowhere.
Sounds almost good. What I'm always interested in is how did it become, or how did you become the photographer for the IFSC circuit? Coming from New Zealand, where you didn't have any IFSC World Cups, right? Uh, how did that happen?
So it's a long story, but I'll give you a condensed version.
Hmm.
So I was a comp climber myself for a long time, but I was never quite World Cup standard. In fact, I was horribly far from it. But when you're in New Zealand, you have a bit of an ego and you think you're better than you are. Um, and so for a few years, I qualified to go to World Cups, but life kept coming up, so I just didn't go. And then I busted my knee pretty bad, and that was the end of my climbing career, because I just couldn't compete at a high level anymore. So I picked up a camera and really threw myself into photography, and pretty much got fat and lazy because I couldn't run, couldn't climb, couldn't do most of the sports I loved, and did a lot of motorsport photography, a lot of downhill photography,
Hmm.
athletics, things like that. Was out taking photos of people like Asafa Powell at international meets, things like that. And then I looked in the mirror one day and I was so damn fat. I was like, oh, I need to start climbing again, even if I suck.
So
And
you didn't climb at all for a long time?
yeah, so I stopped climbing beginning of 2004 and started climbing again 2010.
Mm.
And went from about 70 kilos up to about 120 or 130 kilos.
Mm.
So, I got rotund and middle-aged, and I was like, that can't be me anymore. So I started climbing, and of course, because I'd got really into photography, I was taking my camera along, and I was friends with James Casey because I was competing against him at the beginning of his career when I was at the tail of mine.
Mm.
And he said, I'm going to Europe in 2013 to the World Cups. Do you want to come along? And I said, yeah, yeah, I do. And I just belonged. As soon as I got there, I went, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so I did 4 World Cups that year. Next year, I went back with the intent of taking a 6 month career break from my normal job and
Mm.
just getting as much of the season as I could. And uh, right before that happened, my job laid off a whole lot of people, but sadly not me.
Which was your
And
normal job? Sorry, again.
so I was actually in corporate middle management at that stage. So I've had a few jobs over my life, but at that stage, I was working for a big teleco as a quality assurance guy. So I was
Mm.
reading people's emails and listening to their calls. I was basically an internal spy. Um, and yeah, they said, look, you can't go on leave anymore because we made all these people redundant. We need you to stay. And I said, well, no, here's my notice, and just went for it. And the IFSC approached me that year and said, look, would I be interested in being their photographer? Because previously they've had some fantastic photographers, but the photographers they've had have almost always had national allegiance. They've
Mm.
almost always been tied to a team. And so what you'd end up with at the end of a World Cup is you'd have a whole lot of, or predominantly athletes of certain teams.
Mm.
Um, and from the beginning, I never did that because I always was like, let's take the photos of everyone. And so they approached me then, and I said yes, and that was all she wrote. I've been doing it ever since.
Cool. Looking back to your first World Cup, how did that happen, or how did you manage and plan this? Like, did you just take $3,000 and were like, okay, I'm going over there, or did you contact them and like, how does it work to get onto the stage and being allowed to take pictures?
So I think I did things, I would say, a lot more right than a lot of photographers I see coming into World Cups now, because I've worked in press at other events, because I've shot Formula One races, because I've shot Speedway Grand Prix,
Cool.
international athletics events, things like that. I went, okay, so you get your press pass, you get a cover letter from a magazine who you'll be shooting for
Mm.
things like that. And then I supplied all that to the IFSC, and they kind of stared at me blankly at that stage and was like, "Oh well, okay, yeah, that's nice. You can take photos." I didn't realize all I had to say was something like, "I'm a nice guy and I like wearing yellow vests." Um, and so the first World Cup I went to, I'll still remember because it was in Malau in the south of France, and I had 2 months in Europe. I did 4 World Cups, but I treated it as a holiday. I had my holiday pay from work. I rented a car for the whole time, and I went climbing in Font. I went climbing in Magic Wood. I went to Malo Blocco, and I
Mm.
did 4 World Cups. But that first ever World Cup, I rocked up, and I just remember going, I'm in the wrong place, because I got there, and 2013 doesn't seem that long ago, but it was like a bit of a different era.
Mm.
And so the first thing I noticed was, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm in a climbing competition for dwarves, because all the famous people I saw were like this tall. They were like the shortest people in the world. And I don't think I'm overly tall at like 184, but like they're little. Like,
Yeah,
when
on
you
average, I guess 170, right?
yeah, 170, and a lot of them are under that. And really there was only Jan and Jorg who were probably taller than me back then. Um, and so I went in, and I just remember, so I just went at Milau. There were 4 freestanding boulders, and there was a
Mm.
curtain between each boulder, and the athletes were staging behind them. But at that stage, they would let us just stand behind the curtains and shoot out on the angle. There was no separation. It was, as I said, it was very different. It was a lot more cowboy back then. And the only thing I'd ever seen 95% of these climbers in was watching competition videos or following websites and stuff. And I'll still
Mhm.
remember, because when you're a fan of the sport, there's people you're like, oh my goodness, that's da 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 da. And I was taking photos, and so I would step back into the staging area and then step out, take a couple more photos, like compose myself between shots, change lenses or whatever. And Eula Worm had done the first problem or whatever in long pants. And
Mm.
I was a huge fan of Eula Worm. I think she's a wonderful climber, still do. And I sort of stepped back into the staging area, and she had just like taken her pants off and was putting a pair of shorts on. And I'm like, um, okay, like, it's not sort of how you expect to meet your heroes. But
That's true, but it's also climbing. Like everyone is still down to earth or like really easy to approach. Oh, not all of them, but most of them. Like we talked about it. Like some have managers nowadays. That changed a little bit, but most of them are still.
to be honest, the climbers from bigger climbing nations who are really successful tend to be the most down to earth, because I
Mm.
think everyone keeps them grounded, because there's so many good climbers around. They feel normal. Whereas coming from
Mm.
New Zealand was like super dog eat dog, because it was a really small community, and really like just daggers out the whole time. And I was amazed when I went to the international scene just how chill and accommodating it was.
Mm, mm. Do you think that other nations or athletes who are coming from uh, not that developed climbing nations have the same impression and have the same feeling and could be a little bit intimidated when they approach the World Cups for the first time?
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you come from a circumstance where you haven't had, say, previous World Cup climbers within your generation competing at that level, and you go to an international comp, you don't know where the level is. And so you can either go in with your head full of fluffy white clouds thinking that you're going to do wonderful because all the holds look really big in World Cups, they can't be that hard. Or you go in being absolutely petrified because, oh my God, have you seen how strong those guys look? And I think once you familiarize yourself with that, then you can exist comfortably in that community. But I think the initial, it's either the initial intimidation of thinking everyone is unbelievable, or the initial burn of thinking you're going to do well and then coming last out of 250 people. Like, either one of those is a price to pay.
Good. What kept you around? Like, was it just the job offer, or was it?
No, never. The job has never been enough to pay the bills. The job effectively is an element of my income. I'm not a full-time employee of the IFSC. I'm contracted to do the events. So that just covers really events. And then I sell photos to make a living. And I work with a lot of really good brands, which allows me to do that. But it's the people that keep me around. I mean, it's the people and it's the sport. It's the seeing the most incredible moments in this sport all the time. Like, you know, I'm in an incredibly privileged position because, especially once you get to know the athletes like I do, I get to go on outdoor trips with them as well as being at the comps with them. So I get to know them really well. They are, in general, people I have a huge amount of respect for because I love motivated, ambitious people. I just find them much more interesting human beings to be around because they have purpose. And like, so I competed for 8 years at the national level. And okay, I competed at 8 years at the national level before there were digital cameras, basically. Do you know how many cameras I have? Do you know how many photos I have from 8 years?
I don't know, 300,000?
No, this is when I competed.
Okay. Not that many. Oh, no. I think I've seen one of you.
Yeah,
I think you
I
posted one.
tend to post. There's like 3 or 4 photos of me, and you know, I won. So we used to have a national cup series, and I won 3 national cups. I was consistently a finalist in national champs and national cups. I was top 3 or 4 ranked in the country, which okay means nothing because we were all a bit shit, but for, you know, half a decade, and there are 3 or 4 photos of the whole time I climbed. And for
it's
me,
different nowadays. Yeah.
It's so different. But for me, the good photos are still special, and I get that huge buzz out of, you know, it's so addictive getting that moment, getting that photo where you're like, you know, one day Yanya's going to be a little 85-year-old lady with her great grandkids on her lap, and she'll be sitting there showing them photos of when she was young, and they'll be my photos, and I will have been dead for 40 years. You know, it's like a legacy. It's like, and I'm not saying that in any way like negative. Like, I'm just, you know, I'm 25 years older than her. So if she gets to 85, I'm pushing 105. So it's like, yeah.
That's cool. Thank you. If everything would have gone normal this year, what would have been your schedule for this year?
My schedule for this year was a little bit colorful because there was some ups and some downs. The IFSC is, although I'm the official IFSC photographer, I don't always get to do all the comps. They have this perception that they don't want to wear me out, which to me is absurd because I just go and go and go. If I've got a job to do, I do the damn thing. But so I was going to miss the continental champs this year and focus on the World Cups and the Olympics. So for me this year, there would have been no continental champs and there would have been no youth worlds. but it would have been the World Cups and then, of course, the Olympics. And then pretty early that started dwindling, and it's been dwindling ever since. So
Yeah. Oh, that's such a shame because like the continental championships, I wanted to go to Moscow because for me it's like the last competition where only one qualifies, and of course it's an European champion, but honestly no one gives a damn shit if you get second or third. It's just about getting the first spot, the gold medal, being the last person earning the spot going to Tokyo. And I think this is especially like for our first Olympic Games, like really intense and really that's such a challenging moment and such it's like the pressure has to be intense, and I cannot wait for this competition to happen and to see what happens. Just like from an outside point of view of the story of competition climbing, it's like now or never.
yeah, I mean, put it this way, although I said I wasn't going for the IFSC, I probably still would have gone. Um, because I also document for commercial clients.
Mm.
And so, and to me, just the assurance that the athletes are going to get photos in that quality, and I'm not saying that to be arrogant because I don't know who they had lined up, but
Mm.
just to make sure they get photos of that quality consistently. And by they, I mean my clients and the athletes themselves. And if
Mm.
the IFSC don't hire someone who's as consistent or as good, well, that's their loss. And there's been several comps over the years where I haven't been contracted to go, and I've self-funded and gone myself to do it for other clients. And by the time I've got there, the IFSC has been asking me to do it for them anyway. So I just kind of expect that now and and do it.
Looking back, do you know like how much on average you travel? How many flights? How many nights in a hotel? The distance over a year? Do you know that?
I don't know 1,000,000%, but on my phone I do have this wonderful thing called App in the Air,
Hmm.
which shows me my details from 2015 to now,
Okay.
of just of the flights I've taken. And so 215 to now is 600,000 kilometers in the air. 841 hours on planes, which is about 34 days,
Oh,
across 47 airlines, 35 countries, 27 aircraft types, 67 airports.
okay.
I
That's a
fly a
lot.
bit.
You fly.
I Yeah, so I can't remember if I told you, but after Studio Block, I hopped on the train in, was it Memmingen, to go down to Basel and then to Zurich and to Magic
Mm.
Wood. Um, and I happened to be sitting behind Greta Thunberg, who's
Oh.
famous little eco warrior person. And I almost hid under the seat because I was fairly sure if she saw me, she would just instantly realize I was Satan. Like, in the end, I was wrong because it turned out she probably had coronavirus and I was sick for about a week after that. So I blame her for everything. But no.
That's a good one. You're
So,
not
but
the only one blaming her for stuff, but
yeah, I mean, I actually support her stance, but
Mm.
for my, I almost always travel by rail in Europe, and I even travel by rail in China. So when I'm
Mm.
going between places like Chongqing, Xiamen, places like that, even if it's 6 or 7 hours on the train, I'll do that rather than fly. But other times it's just logistically not possible not to fly.
Yeah. What's China? What is it like being there on a train all on your own? Does it work? Does it work well? Or
China is a culturally very intense place to be because it's so different. It's one of the few places in the world that I've been where chances are people aren't going to speak English. People aren't going to have some at least halfway bridge where you can get the
connect?
point across. Because,
Mhm.
even their language, their written language, because it's not based on the Greek alphabet, it's so, so different that
Yeah.
you see the symbols. You don't know if the symbol means that you're about to open door to the toilet, or if you're going to open the door and fall off the train. So it presents challenges, but I've always said for myself, China is an incredibly confronting country to be in. I went from hating it to disliking it to being kind of ambivalent about it. I like a lot of the Chinese people. I just don't necessarily like where we go for IFSC events, because it tends to be big cities, high pollution, really big population density, and I'm not a city guy at the best of times. So
what's your favorite World Cup to shoot? Vale?
No.
But it's in the outdoors.
Yeah, but it's in the outdoors at altitude. People don't realize until they've been to Vale how tired you get from running around for a whole qualifying round. You get back to a hotel, you feel like you've run a half marathon. You're blowing so hard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the acclimatization is a thing. Getting used to the altitude there. It's 2,000 meters or over whatever it is. It's high, and it's weird because I don't ever think I was someone who thought he was affected by altitude. And then Shauna or someone said, well, that's just the altitude. I was like, oh yeah. So although I enjoy Vale, it's absurdly expensive, and the altitude's a pain. You get burnt to a crisp if it's sunny, because you just do. One great thing about pollution in Europe is you can not wear sunscreen because you got layers of smog. But I think for me, favorite World Cups, Munich would always have to be never top of the list. I mean, Munich is just the atmosphere, the being there is always something special. The events they've had in Russia, a couple of World Cups, and Youth World Champs, and I also went to another comp in Russia a couple of years ago. Absolutely love the Russians. Take it so seriously and try so hard to do a good job. It can be fantastic. Meiringen has got amazing over the years. It's weird because my perception of a comp as well is driven by different things than a spectator. If I think a comp's good, it's because the lighting works.
Lighting works in a professional preparation area and maybe a work area for a photographer.
Yeah, exactly. If they have a media area with good Wi-Fi and they have good vantage points and good lighting, I will enjoy a bad comp in those circumstances far more than I'll enjoy a good comp with bad lighting, no internet, no press area, because it makes doing my job just a nightmare. Like when I'm in the old days when it used to be so bad in China, and it's still rough with the Great Firewall of China, I used to set my alarm every 2 hours through the night. So if I got to sleep at 1, my alarm would go off at 3, at 5, at 7, and then at 8 to actually wake me up so I could go and shoot the next day. And that was because the uploads were so slow and they would drop all the time. And so I would literally have to set my alarm and wake up 4 or 5 times through the night, restart the uploads, go back to sleep, alarm, the uploads are stopped again, restart. And people don't see that side of it. And it could have been the most spectacular days climbing, but by the end you're like, I hate this place. Because you just...
Which one was your most challenging competition so far, would you say?
I think for a lot of us, Azerbaijan in 2014 was the most challenging World Cup we ever had.
Baku, right?
Baku. It's the only one where half of us nearly died. Everyone got ripped off. There's just, you could write a book about that one competition. It was an incredible experience. I actually really enjoyed being there because it was this great vibe with the athletes. But we flew in straight from Chongqing, so we flew in on like the Monday, and the competition was on Saturday, Sunday. And so it was the German guys were there, so Jan, Euler, Moni, Jonas Barman, Udo, and then who else was there? Alex Puccio, Joel Zer, Shauna Coxey, a few others. And we got there and we went to the official hotel, and basically every day they would knock on our doors for the complimentary activities, and they had these buses all logoed up with IFSC World Cup, and we'd jump in these buses and be taken on complimentary activities that we had to do that were interesting. And on the first day, a load of us went out to these petroglyphs, and it was this amazing rock field. It looked like Waco Tanks or Rocklands or something. Just I don't know, just this golden sandstone rock, just looked amazing. But we had these minders with us, and they wouldn't let us climb because a snake might bite you and kill you. So we could only look at like all this amazing rock. And then we got back in the van afterwards, and the van had probably 8 of the best competition climbers on the planet in it. And the driver just kept falling asleep. And because the van was full, I was sitting in the middle at the front. Udo was sitting on one side of me, drivers on the other. And I'd just have to keep grabbing the steering wheel and shouting at the driver to wake him up. And the guys in the back of the van, Alex and all those guys were freaking out. And we're all shouting at the minders, let me drive. I can drive. Let me drive. And they're like, no, if you drive, he loses face. And if he loses face, it's very bad. And then finally he stopped the van and got out and poured like a bottle of water over his head, and then just got back in. And we were like 80k out of town, and he just gunned it, just ridiculous speed the whole way into town. And so yeah, that was sort of like just a taster of the things that were going on there. And then at the end, when everyone went to pay for the hotels, it was 18% surcharge for using a credit card. Not 1.8, 18. And it was 30 euros a day for all the complimentary activity.
Suddenly you had to pay for them. Cool.
Well, and of course all the federations are paying on federation credit cards. And the hotel basically said, you have to pay. If you don't pay, we call the airport, you don't get out of the country. So the whole thing was just, it defies belief. And that's only 2 of 20 stories I could tell you about that event. But, as I said, I had fun. I was with a group of people I love hanging out with, and we got out the other end and we all had stories. So,
do you think it's worth it to host World Cups in countries which are neither developed in climbing culture, history, industry so far, and also neither in their way, just in the whole country being like?
That's a very tricky question, and it's one that I will say is one that I kind of have to skirt around because obviously my relationship with the IFSC, but I will give the answer that I do wish that more attention would be paid to the socio-economic and societal issues in countries before they allowed an event to be there. I think as a sport, we can send the wrong signal if we go into some places.
But on the other hand, I get that. But on the other hand, I think it would have been nice to have more World Cups. For example, Udo was such a big fan of the Mumbai World Cup in 2016. He said like he's never seen a show like this at this atmosphere. And I would like to see, for example, I talked to some of the IFSC as well. And for example, I don't like that there's a Pan-American championship, or was already, like that you combine North America, including Canada, and South America. While you have in South America, they may not be as advanced yet, but it's such a big continent. And and I'd like to have more World Cups like in Cape Town or somewhere, yeah, like in Chile or Brazil, you know, Rio de
Oh,
Janeiro. I'm imagining, yeah, I'm flying over to Brazil, World Cup on the beach, dancing all night long,
yeah.
fire games, drinking, party, you know, like hosting more World Cups, Sydney, Melbourne, anyway, Auckland, why not? Okay, it's a long distance, but it used to be like this that people used to skip China World Cups because it's too far away. And I think, would you agree that you're missing these international adventures to countries you haven't been yet?
Well, I think we do need to look more globally. I just think we need to pick and choose the countries we go globally to.
Yeah.
So, for instance, Mumbai, I completely agree with Udo. Absolutely loved Mumbai. It's one of my favorite World Cups I've ever worked, both
Mm.
years. Um, and they had a fantastic crowd, and everyone was psyched, and everyone was so happy we were there. And yet you contrast that with some of these places we go where the number of competitors will outnumber the number of spectators.
Mm.
And so why are we there if there's 25 people watching us?
Mm.
Um, when we were a couple of years ago, went to Youth Olympics in Buenos Aires,
Yeah.
and just amazing, like so much fun, and obviously part of a much bigger event, but the vibe, the culture, everything was amazing. I'd love to go back to South America. I'd love to go to Africa, but I think the sport has to be conscious to go into developing markets, not to go into non-existent markets.
Mm. And what about combining, like climbing used to be combined at some points with the X Games, for example? X Games, you see the best sports, skateboarding, BMX, skating. Again, skateboarding, that's what you want to see. Um, what do you think about this?
Well, the big problem is, and it was always this assumption people had that was just blatantly wrong, is that climbing is a extreme sport,
Mhm.
and it's not. It doesn't fit that mold. You could make it fit that mold, but it would just be a line of silly dinos. I think they called it Seeker Comp. Um, so like no, I think, for instance, we're in the World Games, or were in 2017 and the one before that, and I believe we're supposed to be in the one now
Mhm.
in 2022, and that's for all the non-Olympic sports. And the reason we're potentially still in is because we'll be in as individual disciplines, not as combined like we are in Olympics. And as a multi-sport event for us to shine in, that is perfect. But we don't, as much as a lot of DJs at World Cups seem to think that they're in a bad disco and they're living all their childhood dreams of being the next Fatboy Slim, that's not what we are. And so, yeah, like even at Youth Olympics, we were next to the 3-on-3 basketball, the breakdancing, and the skating, and we just
Mhm.
attract a really different crowd.
Mhm.
We really do. We are much more of an athletic crowd than a I'm going to ride my BMX off something and see what happens to me when I get to the bottom. Um, and I used to skate. I used to race downhill mountain bikes. I'm used to that sort of sport, and climbing is just not that sort of sport. Climbing's tactical. It's intelligent. It's a lot slower. You know, can you imagine a slow boulder problem in the X Games?
Yeah, it's hard to present. Do you think climbing competitions are too complicated yet?
No, and yes. It depends. It because you're talking about three different disciplines in one.
Okay, let's go one. Yeah, let's go bouldering. I think our
Bouldering,
both favorite. I think it's still a little bit too complicated. Too like not for us, but for the rest of the world at some point.
I would disagree. I think the thing that
Mm.
makes bouldering seem complicated is the presentation. I've said for years, and will stand by it till I die, and thankfully it has definitely improved. Bouldering without good live scoring would be like watching basketball without a score.
Yeah,
You
I
see
think what
lots
we
of cool things, but you have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, what
And
we need is the quiff, like where they say Billy Idol, just a second go you can in the next two goes you can win, third go drops you down to fourth place. That's what we need.
yeah, and you can have those graphics for online. And for instance, at Youth Olympics, they had graphics that very much did that on the public display screen as well. So the public could look at the big screen and it would say this person has to get to here to go up a place or whatever. So I don't think the sport itself is too difficult. I think that the way it is presented, the presentation, is just critical, and I don't think we've hit all the marks yet.
No. Fair answer. Fair answer. Looking back when you started 2013 and now it's 2020, how did the sport itself change when it comes to bouldering and lead climbing? What do you think changed the most?
Okay. So basically, well, firstly, you forgot to ask me about the other two sports, whether
Oh yeah,
too complex or not.
Yeah,
But that's
yeah,
okay.
that's true. But okay, let's go back there. I told you before, I'm not a professional. Like, I think speed is easy to understand. That's why they wanted it to have it in the Olympic Games, and whether you like it or not, you have to say easy to understand. And this is like the core Olympic sport for me. Track and field, 100 meters. You start there, you finish there, run, boom. You start there, you finish there, climb, boom.
I
Easy.
agree 80%. What I think they need to change in speed is because for years it was two people racing against each other, still is.
Teams.
And no, not teams, just 4 lanes. You've got auto belays now. You don't need belayers standing around everywhere. You can run 4 lanes next to each other because as soon as one person slips in speed, you kind of disengage from it. Okay, the races are very short anyway, but you just switch off. So I come from a background where I follow a lot of other sports, and one of the sports I follow is Speedway. And Speedway, they have 16 riders go through to the finals, so exact same as in speed. But what they then do is they run a series of heats between those 16 riders. So everyone races everyone else, and you get 3 points for a win, 2 for a second, 1 for a third. And then the top 8 from them go to the semi, the top 2 from them go to finals. And so you get, then all the climbers get more climbing, the spectators get a better show, there's more drama during the early phases of finals in a way. And everyone's like, oh, it's too hard to do. No, it's not. You might have to change the speed route so you could fit 4 lanes in an existing speed wall area, but you could do that. And then you put 2 more auto belays at the top. Bang! You've increased the show. And lead, and the reason I wanted to bring this into this part of the conversation is because it comes into the next part. Lead lives and dies on the route setting, more than the other 2 disciplines, I'd say, more than bouldering, more than, because lead is a slow sport. If you have, for instance, a resistance route, and unfortunately we saw a real trend of it in the women's, but then there's some route setters that don't do it, others that do. But if you get a route which is resistance to the head wall and then a boulder problem, it's like watching paint dry, because you're not testing the climbers at all, and they all climb up, and then they get to this one 7C boulder problem, and maybe one gets through, and they get a top, and the other 7 have fallen off within a move of each other down there, or maybe 5 get through, and you get 5 tops and 3 that fell, and there's no engagement. The route setting in lead for me has to be progressively challenging from the beginning, and I think Christian Bindhammer from Germany is the best lead route setter, because he will set risky moves for women more than any other route setter, and he will challenge them. And it breaks my heart when some of the best female lead climbers in the world tell me they want to quit because the routes aren't challenging them.
What do you think? I always thought about, like, why not have like a core team of setters? Like right now, if people who might not know that, like for every different World Cup, there's a different team of setters. And I think what would be really beneficial is to have like, or at least try it, have the same 5 setters doing all events. Maybe one setter on and one setter off. But this way you see, okay, we fucked up last week. Now let's make it better. What would you think about this?
I don't know if we can do it with all 5 setters, but I think there should always be a continuation of setters over like a 3 comp period. That say you, so we're talking lead here, say you start in Villars, that at least 2 of the Routesetting team would do Villars, Chamonix, and Briançon. And then you have someone join them in Chamonix and then do Briançon, and so that you have every setter doing like 3 comps but with overlaps so that they can iron these things out. I think and it probably comes down to logistics and money at the bottom line, whether setters can do that. But like, I think there needs to be more consistency. And to me, that has always been a big answer, but it's hard to have, for instance, when you have the first 3 World Cups of the season and lead tend to be a week apart.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't, they'd work 21 days without a rest. But you could do that if you had half the team, if you had a full team starting in Villars, and then you had the next team starting in Chamonix, and then the guys from Villars come who are coming across and go, actually, from what we saw at the level, we should do, but yeah, Routesetting is the most thankless, brutal job, because when you do a fantastic job, you're just doing your job. And if you do anything less than a fantastic job, what did you do wrong?
True.
So, I think it can be really easy to, as I said, I definitely have dramas with the setting, but it tends not to be the quality of the route setters, it tends to be the style they set within. And I think that is something that can be dictated by management. And when you get to some comps and you get a bunch of tops in finals, for instance, and you speak to the setters afterwards and they said, oh yeah, the organizers wanted 2 or 3 tops. And you're like, because you know how impossible that is for a setter to gauge.
Yeah, but you heard that as well, right? I heard some setters tell me this as well, that the organizers ask them to do an easier route, an easier boulder or stuff like this for more success, more things to show on the TV, right?
Yeah, and it's completely counterproductive because it doesn't provide the competition the athletes need. To me, a route that scores 95% on the route chart is a route where everyone falls off before the top, but you have separation. A route that scores 100% on the route chart is where one person tops and everyone else falls off with separation. If you get 2 points, and if you get 3 or more, I'm sorry, that's, time to me, and again, this is all my opinion, this is not IFSC, this is because I am just a contractor. To me, going to time in a World Cup is the worst thing in the world. It means that you can get an amazing climber come out and know that they can't win because they're cruising to the top of a route and they go, I'm going to top this. And they go, but I only qualified 3rd. And the 2 people before me or 2 people after me are faster or whatever. So chances are I'm not going to win. And you can see people mentally disengage. You can watch it. Or you have this pressure, for instance, with Jesse and Janja in Innsbruck, where Jessie had to overcome the difficulty of the route, and she did. Janja then has to overcome the difficulty of the route, and she has to climb to beat an invisible time that she doesn't know. That's not an equal competition.
No, I also think it would alter the style of someone's climbing style if it keeps on being like this. Imagine Giant Kim, who's not the fastest climber. she takes her time. It's her style. But if she has to get used to break or like to match a time, it's just like something which is not her style. I don't. Oh, yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about Jane Kim is she looks very slow and methodical, but she generally is always within the time. She seldom times out. She probably times out less than Yanya, which is a shock because Yanya always looks so fast, but she milks rests when she gets them, whereas Jane Kim is smooth, stylish, and slow, and just So they have a different style, but people think Jane Kim's slower than she is. She actually.
Okay, I have to check up online.
It's just something I noticed because I used to say the exact same thing, and as I watch more and more comps, I was like, I always say that, but she's not the one timing out.
Yeah, I'm not talking about timing out. I'm just about like that she knows that she has to climb way quicker, and that's something for me. If you're not used to it, if you're like, okay, I pace through this section, and then I take a break, then I climb quicker again. That's my style: quick, slow, where others just climb steady. I think it's just like putting more pressure on yourself to change your climbing style. It could.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I would. I sorry, I misunderstood what you first meant, but
easy. You mentioned you had a favorite lead route setter, Christian. Do you have a favorite boulder setter?
I like different boulder setters for different aspects of it. I think you see a more diverse skill set shown by boulder setters just because they have to present very different challenges, whereas the challenges tend to be within a tighter frame. And so I don't know what the bias is, but like I've always liked Jamie's route setting, Jamie Cassidy. And it's interesting, for instance, I love Chris Danielson as a route setting coordinator at World Cup level. I think he sets the World Cups where he's chief tend to have superb boulders. But US nationals always suck, so I never quite know what's going on there because he's so good. It's so hard as well with bouldering because you have different setters expressing different styles.
It also occurred to me, like, the question I think is not fair. Even you might have, for example, Christian Binhammer as your favorite route lead setter, but it's not entirely his own route. Like, the whole team tweaks it. And that's probably the question should have been like, is it unfair to pick one of the setters? Because
I think it is unfair. I think what you need to look at is who is your favorite chief, because the chiefs very much dictate the style of what you're going to see.
Yeah.
And I think having Chris Danielson as a chief, I really enjoy his boulder problems. Having Percy as a chief, I really enjoy his boulder problems. Romain from France, really good as well. I mean, it's so hard because I don't want to say a list and then the people nod on the list going, wow, that guy thinks I'm a dick. And chances are I do, but I don't want to.
I think we can leave it like this because it's more or less like what I wanted to point out and what I think is that it's not about the single setter, it's more about the team. The teamwork gets run usually by the manager, by the head setter who's doing, But the original question, I think like 15 minutes ago was like also like a general stupid question, but I couldn't frame it any other way. How much did climbing change, or what do you think happened over the last 7 years you've been part of the IFSC series?
Okay, so I'm going to start with lead. And I think in lead, men's lead got much riskier. And by riskier, what I mean is insecure movements. I don't think women's has caught up yet, which I think is why a lot of us get frustrated by the show. And it's interesting because, for instance, I know from talking to a lot of the route setters that if you set a route where it's hard for the female climbers to heel hook, it's going to completely change the nature of a route, because they can heel hook and rest on anything. If you take those heel hooks out, and the climbers that are, the route setters that are clued into that, you really do get a different vibe to their routes. But I think, in lead, you're seeing more risky moves. You're seeing more bouldering holds, more big volume open holds. You're seeing, there's from the earlier days when it was a lot more secure climbing, that style's gone. Bouldering is interesting because bouldering, what I would say a lot of people might not agree with, but a lot of people never get to see the whole World Cup.
Yeah.
So I constantly read people say Boulder World Cups are too parkour, blah, blah, blah. And the answer is no, they're not. The majority of semifinals and qualifying problems aren't parkour. They're pure hard bouldering. But you tend to get one or two parkour style problems in a final for the show. But you've already separated the climbers to get to that level. And I think that the boulders aren't incredibly more parkour than they were traditionally. It's just that if people are watching all the World Cup finals, that's the problems they're seeing, and they're not seeing the whole comp. I think, again, just the holds are the biggest thing that's changed. The holds, and unfortunately there's been a couple of what I would say negative trends. I think the shoulder pops, the hand down and plants, certain moves go in and out of fashion. And when you see like the jump into a double shoulder, really common these days, or when you see the coming across hand plant, catch, hold the swing, really common these days. And then you see, to me, they are injurious moves. They're risky moves for the climbers' bodies. You need to be physiologically really well sorted to have your musculature and everything balanced and stuff to be safe in that. If you've got a weakness and then you talk it through those angles, something, it's risk. To me, it's as risky as like the old downwards dynos that they banned.
Downwards dynos, yeah. Thank God. Looking at the Olympic influence on our climbing, do you think climbing, competition climbing, changed a little bit too much just to fit into the Olympic Games? For example, having 8 finalists and just 3 bowlers in the Olympic final, and now we don't know whether the World Cups should change accordingly to the Olympic Games, or should it be vice versa, or should be the Olympic Games something really outstanding happening every 4 years in this format? Or should we stay true to our core?
Firstly, I'm at a personal level, I'm really against it going to 3 boulders. I feel that with 4 boulders, you can set to a full range of skills in a boulderer, and you can test all of those skills. As soon as you take one of those boulders out, you're limiting the amount of skills that you can set across in 3 boulders, especially the way we score, that we only score zone top. So you really need effectively 2 cruxes per boulder. And if you go down to 3 boulders, you're limiting those cruxes. And for instance, Toulouse, I think, did a pretty good job of it, but Pan Am's, I don't know if you watched Pan Am's. I
watched Pan Am's.
I like
the runner. Was it girls? I don't even remember anymore. The only thing I remember that the walls were dirty, blue volumes on blue walls. That's something I would not see as an Olympic qualification event, or like it.
I think in terms of venue, they did the best they could, because it is tricky having somewhere you can run all 3 disciplines if you don't have dedicated facilities. But for me, it was more that with 3 boulders, they didn't establish separation in the men's. And as soon as they didn't establish separations, it meant that if you had literally 1 slip in boulders, your Olympic dream was over. So I think we have to stay at 4 boulders. I think we have to stay at 4 boulders. We have to accept that maybe for Olympics it has to be 3, but this comes down to one of my biggest single bugbears, and it's not just about Olympics, it's about the whole shebang, is we can never have commercial press dictate how an event should look and therefore change what we do. We are not a commercial press-based sport. We are an athlete-based sport. As a sport, we're there for the athletes. That's who we represent. That's who we're showcasing. That's who we're giving the opportunity to do the best they can. It's no different to when you hear that people want multiple tops because it's better for a highlights reel. They're not climbing for a highlights reel. This is a World Cup. They are climbing to be the best in the world competition climber on that day. And if someone from some TV news station says, well, we would prefer this, you turn around and say, well, look, that's not how the sport works. And the same thing will have to happen in Olympics, that they will have to say, you're going to have all these broadcasters, and you need to say to them, this is how the sport works. Things are hard. The lead competition is the person who gets highest. In an ideal world, someone will get to the top. If no one does, well, that also happens. It's much easier to explain that than, well, 3 people get to the top, then we go back to the last round. But if they got the same in the last round, then we're going to go to that, and then we're going to, it's like, just make it hard. Do the athletes justice. Give them the respect they deserve.
Let's see how it works out. I think it's quite confusing where the World Cups, even putting Corona crisis aside, where and how the World Cups, and then I think there was also the plan for an European Boulder Cup series. So like too many cups, too many competitions happening. At some point it was, I think I mentioned it at some point, like for example, the 2019 World Championship. No one really cares who was the world champion of 2019 because it's more or less just a qualification event for the Olympic Games. And that's something what I didn't like, because in former times being a world champion was pretty cool. I also think they shouldn't do it like every 2 years. I think they should also do it with like soccer, football, like just every 4 years. Always like Olympic Games, 2 years later, World Championship. So it's like really worth something. And you of course it's way more pressure, but then it's not just like another World Cup,
Yeah, especially for me with the Olympic qualifying, it should never have been combined into other events. It should be the European Olympic qualifiers. It should be the Pan American Olympic qualifiers. It should be the Oceania Olympic qualifier, just like Toulouse was an Olympic qualifier. And yeah, I strongly agree with that, because I think the rest was secondary, and you weren't putting in individual athlete, like with European champs that was supposed to obviously happen in Moscow recently, but didn't because of COVID. Like, teams were gearing Olympic qualifiers up. They weren't necessarily gearing their best boulderers, their best lead climbers, their best speed climbers for the individual disciplines. They were looking at, there's so many tactical layers. If you are France and you want Fanny to get through, do you stick in a whole swag of strong French bouldering females? Because what happens if they beat Fanny and bouldering is her ace in the hole for Olympic combined? That's going to knock her score down. And so there's layers of complexity that I think people don't necessarily realize, and there should be like separation of church and state. Everything to do with Olympics is a completely separate system. World Cups are a system. World Champs is a system.
I think because Like the IFSC really wanted to get into the Olympic Games, and they did it, but it was really maybe the time to plan everything accordingly was not enough, because I have the impression everything got like bunched together, and a lot of things were not thought well, or like not all these, like this Japanese dilemma, like you said, the World Championships, it was not obvious at the first second who was qualified. So we have 4 Japanese people in the finals. What happens now to the to number 3 and number 4? Do they get replaced with spot 7 and 8? And like that, this is
Yeah,
not obvious yet, and stream switches off, and everyone at home is like, okay, what's happening now? And then you read news on Instagram, CDN, this Canadian news site, which is like always well informed, makes better publicity statements and quicker than the IFSC actually about what's happening, who qualified and who not. And I think they could have prevented this with like splitting. Yeah, like you said, church and state.
yeah,
Good.
yeah. I mean, as I said, I don't work for the IFSC. I just contract for them.
Yeah.
But from a personal perspective, as someone in the media, it's been a frustrating journey getting some of that information. And it's been frustrating as a spectator when you're knowing people who haven't even qualified for finals are going to Olympics, yet people who qualify for finals aren't going to Olympics. And it just got a bit jumbled. And we still don't know from Hachioji who's going to Olympics.
Yeah, true. Yeah, let's think about other sports. I don't really know, but in Germany, for some sports, you have to do a quota, I think, for running, and then it doesn't even mean that you have to qualify via an European Championship. Do you know anything about that?
It depends on the sport. A lot of sports
Mm,
will have qualifying times, for instance, but they are different sports. If you are a rower or a runner
mm,
or something like that, you generally have a target time which will put you in the qualification bracket.
mm,
Other sports will have results at world level competitions that will put you in a qualifying bracket, things like that. It does vary sport by sport. Um, so it's a complex one, and I think it will all change by Paris, because of course for Paris we have a separate speed event, and I think we're also going to have a higher number of athletes available to qualify, so that will
mm,
and they will have had this to learn from. I think it's
mm,
tough because it's very easy to sit here and be a critic, but you know that a lot of those guys are working really hard to
mm,
optimize things, and when they don't come off because of some oversight, it's really easy to sit on the sideline and go,
yeah, yeah,
what were you
yeah, yeah.
thinking? And the answer
Yeah,
is they weren't thinking that.
I have a lot of respect for it, because I talk to many of those guys, and it's a lot of work, and it's not that you're just talking to the Olympic Federation. You're also talking always backwards to the national federations of climbing, the press, athletes, trainers, coaches. Everyone can just grab a phone and be like, "Okay, IFSC, what's happening?" I don't agree with it. So it's like a really hard job. Just wanted to know what you think about it. We were talking already for more than an hour. Eddie, we do this on a regular basis, but I just want to probably finish this up. If people are interested in any further talking of us, they will let us know. And let's see. 3 more questions, quick questions to finish this off. What was your favorite climbing comp you ever attended or ever watched?
Oh, that's tricky, and I will probably change my mind about 6 times tonight after I answer you. Uh, because I think there's an emotional association with comps.
Mm,
And so the comps that you have an emotional connection with resonate with you longer than a comp that might have been fantastic, but there's no emotional connection. For me, Innsbruck 2013, seeing Eula and Jan take their first wins when they'd
mm,
been so close before, but neither had ever won a World Cup. And that was in my first season, so everything was new and fresh, and that was extraordinary. But then I would probably say Eula winning in Munich in 2014 would top that for me, because that crowd, the atmosphere, the intensity was just...
That was crazy. That was a crazy night.
Yeah, it was. It's hard to describe, because I have this different perspective. It's hard to describe to people what it's like to be that close. That, I'm not there on TV. I'm not even in the crowd. I'm normally within smelling range of the climbers, and I can hear what they're saying. I can hear them cursing under their breath or psyching themselves. I can see the frustration. I get that, everything like that. Petra winning in Paris. Just, oh my goodness! Like,
when was it? 16 or
16? Yeah. It's funny because a lot of these that I'm giving you, Rene Kruder's first win, Maringen, like, I was crying. I will not deny it. I cried when Kruder won, because for so long he had been that guy that was good but was never going to win a World Cup, and then he won a World Cup, and that was, and the same with when Gabri won. Those are the moments that will stay with me more than a technically proficient comp or something like that. It's when someone's life dream has been realized. That's the yeah.
Cool. Okay, two more quick questions. Quick.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite climber? Male and female. Just your favorite.
Oh man, that's Alex Kazanov. In the guys, and I'm going to throw a spanner in the works. Ola Miroslav for the woman.
Okay, cool.
So, because watching her battle through and struggle with her climbing career, not basically hit the target she wanted to, get despondent, get bummed out by the sport, pretty much decide she was going to retire, and then come back, win 2 world champs in a row and qualify for the Olympics, like, that's just straight up hero level.
Cool. Yeah. And Alex?
Alex is just, I mean, this is the thing. I could give you 5 women and 5 men just as easily. Like, I could say Eula just as easily as Ola. I could say Janja just as easily as either of them. In the men, I could say Alex, I could say Megos, I could say Krudi, whoever, Hannes Puman. Like, it's just, he has always wanted it so hard. He's always tried so hard. He's kind of been this battler from like a place that didn't have a huge climbing culture, and he's forged his own path, and I've just got so much respect for that. And he's just such a genuinely great guy that, like, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. There's so many great guys and great women in the sport, but yeah, if I have to pick 2, then off the bat, Ola and Alex.
Mean question, but also interesting.
Brutal question.
Brutal question. Eddie, thank you for taking the time. I hope you don't get too bored. I heard you had a beach behind your house, you had some whales, so the weather should be fine. The air pollution should be gone right by now in New Zealand. Too much traffic, I know, but right now it should be okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's some cows farting in a field over there, but that's the closest thing we get to air pollution.
So yeah, thank you for taking the time, and we will talk hopefully soon again and see each other probably, hopefully this year, otherwise next year.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Okay, bye.
See ya.